fáilte. Welcome to this episode of The Language Question, Ceis na Tangan, a conversation about the Irish language and its history for anyone curious about their relationship with it and its role in our identity. Our guest in this episode is Dr. Seaghan Mac. I found Sean's story inspiring. How he went from a purely academic relationship with the language at school, in which he had never envisaged the language as a spoken one, to complete immersion in the language in the West Kerry Gaeltacht, subsequent mastery, and now living his life through the language. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. As always, I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to ensure that you stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Anyhow, here goes with this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Gumwina tú soltas. Seaghan Mac is a translator, musician, writer, and Irish language activist. He holds a PhD in Irish and has published numerous works of prose and poetry. He has lived and lectured in Irish in Canada, the United States, and Sweden. He's a regular contributor to the Irish language media and is currently based in Brussels, where he works as a translator with one of the European institutions. Seaghan cara tá fáilte is fitherót an show agus gur míle magat as a bheling.
Gur míle magat agus tá fáilte míle fáilte rótsa.
Seaghan, it's wonderful to have you with us, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us here today on the show. What I would love to do, Sean, there's so many facets to what you do in relation to the language, but what I would love to do for our listeners here today is maybe to start with how you first came to the language and your background in relation to that and what that looks like. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, and I'd say the very first contact I had with the language that I can remember, at least, is when I started primary school. I was just gone 4, birthday in July, and started school in September, and straight away they translated my name, and that was kind of interesting. Even at 4, I found that interesting. So I went home to my parents and proudly announced that my name was Sean O'Shonnaigh. And then later, when I was about 17, I decided to make Sean O'Shonnaigh into Seaghan Mac. But that's a different story. But I had contact with the Irish language in school, like most Irish people do, and I can't say I particularly liked the subject, especially going into secondary school when we had to learn things off by heart. And we had a very good Irish teachers. They gave us lots of homework, which we hated. And we had to learn things off by heart, which we also hated. I ended up getting an A1 in higher level Irish for the Leaving Cert, thanks to all the rote learning and thanks to the teachers. But I couldn't speak Irish. I never spoke Irish. And if I ever overheard Gaeilgeoir Gaeltacht or TG Cahir, I just switch off and dismiss it as a language that I don't know. I don't know how much linguistic reflection I did when I was 16, 17, but I think I consider myself as a monolingual person, that English was my language. And well, I went to college then, and I went to study arts, and I ended up doing a degree in English and history. The first few weeks of that liberal arts degree, I did go to a few lectures in Irish, but I couldn't understand the lecturers. They're from the Gaeltacht. I went to a few lectures by a Connemara person and a few by a West Kerry person, and yeah, it just confirmed to me that I couldn't speak Irish, and so I didn't go to any more lectures with the Irish department, and I concentrated on English and history. But another few weeks later, after I'd made the choice to, because the first few weeks in college you get to make, with liberal arts at least, you get to shop around, and I also took philosophy classes and psychology classes as well, but I chose English and history. So then I was working hard at English and history, and a few weeks later I was walking into a building, and this man held the door open for me. Sorry, I held the door open for him, and he goes, "Gur maith." And I said, "Oh, tá fáilte rót," and it felt very natural to me. And then he goes, he said something like, "Oh man, far, talk Gael in the gut, what far," and I understood him, and I felt good about myself. And I came away. I was only 17 then. I was only 17. I came away from that door closing, door opening encounter, um, telling myself that was a natural Irish language experience. That was natural use of the Irish language, and I often mention that moment as the time when I really became interested in Irish. You asked me on a different day, I could probably give a different story, but that definitely sticks out in my mind.
Wow, that is fascinating. But tell me, and so just up to that point, I mean, you had no kind of background in the language at home, or any kind of, would it have been, would have been what would the attitude have been towards Irish in your family and so on? Would that have been any factor?
Yeah, I have some weird memories, some small bits and pieces. Both my parents were born in England, but my father's side of the family are all from Kilkenny, and most of my mother's family are from Waterford, some Kilkenny in there too. But they're both born in London, and my mother was raised in Birmingham. So she didn't do Irish in school. My father came back to Ireland in time to have to do the entire Irish curriculum up until he didn't do the Leaving Cert, so up until Intercert. Then he went into the trade in carpentry. So he did Irish in school, and he's very proud of the fact that his mother was involved in Sinn Féin locally, and he claimed that she spoke Irish. Now, I never met her; she died before I was born, but she was known in our townland as someone who spoke Irish, which I don't think she really was. But I think she probably had respect for the language and used a few phrases and stuff. I remember my father being proud of the fact that he was an Irish man, and that he was a very good hurler. He got a few games for Kilkenny, senior level league matches and stuff, and he won the intermediate championship in Kilkenny with Muncoin. And yeah, a very proud Irishman. But he wouldn't be an Irish speaker, but every now and again he'd say things like out of context, like for no reason. He'd say something like "Cuig me godi an siopa agus canig me caca milish," and I'd say he might say doing the veil sometimes as well.
A useful phrase.
Yeah, caca milish, useful phrase too.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, there's that. There's a few other memories as well. But
but if we come back then to that kind of that pivotal moment there at that doorway at 17, was that in first year in your arts degree at that stage?
Yeah, that was probably like October 2005, I'd say.
And did you make a change then in terms of your choice of subject for your degree? Did you move into art at that stage? Or?
No, but I think around the same time I realized that one of my flatmates spoke Irish to her parents. She was from Cork City, and I used to hear her talking to her father. I think she only spoke Irish to her father, and I used to overhear her speaking Irish to her father, and that like reinforced my new understanding that Irish was a language that actually was in use. I definitely didn't think anybody used Irish naturally. I believed it was a dead language. Coming from South Kilkenny at the age of 17 in 2004, 2005. Yeah, so no, I at that point I stayed with English and history, but I got more and more interested in Irish. I watched the news, Nuacht tSionnaigh. I watched it every single day after that, while learning how to cook for the first time as well. I'd be, coming home with spuds from Lidl, burning pork chops and listening to Nuacht tSionnaigh every single day. That definitely became a ritual. And I used to read Fuinche, which is the paper, which is not around anymore, and really not understand much, but do my best to understand it. And I kept on working very hard at it, and then I started spending more time studying Irish informally than doing my reading for English or for history. And then I was supposed to go for the third year of that liberal arts degree in Mary I. We had a study abroad year or an Erasmus year or a work experience year. And I actually got a place in Loyola College in Chicago to study philosophy for a year there, a year off. And then I got a girlfriend, and she was going to do medicine in Trinity, and I didn't want to go to Chicago. I wanted to stay in Ireland and be near her. And to the last minute, I gave that chance up to go to Chicago. And then I said, what will I do now? I had to go to the placement office in college and say, I'm not going to Chicago. I'm in love. Can I do something else? And they said, like, this is August. First of all, you're depriving another student of the chance to go to Loyola. And second of all, everyone's organized their third year as it is. The only thing that's left, is Forest na Gaeilge. I said, Forest na Gaeilge? In Dublin, up in Dublin. And they said, yeah, there's a terminology committee needs somebody to be involved with the creation of a new dictionary website, which is what turned out to be terma.ie.
Okay.
So I took that chance. I decided to do that, and I was working at focal.ie as it was known then.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved to Dublin. It's the only year I ever spent in all my life in Dublin. I spent a year up there, and I walked to North Frederick Street, where Forest na Gaeilge had offices, listening to Radio na Gaeltachta on my earphones every morning, walking from Ringsend up to North Frederick Street, which is beside O'Connell Street, every morning. And then it was in an Irish-speaking environment in the office, and I met some amazing people who were very helpful. And that was an entire year immersed in Irish. And then I came back and I finished my degree in English and history. But for the final year, we had to do a thesis, a degree thesis. And I asked the English department, the history department, would it be okay if I did my degree thesis with the Irish department? So they were happy to, and the Irish department was happy to allow me to do that as well. And I picked out a topic with Rondon O'Croneen. The topic turned out to be a very good choice of topic because it then became my master's thesis. And then I did an MA in Irish. So I couldn't boast anymore not having done a degree in Irish, because then I had a master's in Irish. Mm-hmm. And then I published that thesis, and then I went teaching Irish in Canada, and then I came back from Canada and did a PhD in Irish, and after that went lecturing in Uppsala University in Sweden. And
And you were a lecturer in Celtic languages, I think, in Sweden. Was that right?
Yeah, I taught Irish, a couple of levels of Irish. I taught Welsh. I taught Celtic literature and Celtic civilization. I was going there. It was a good job. I was going there to learn Swedish, really, but I was very busy in that job, and I really didn't learn much Swedish at all, unfortunately. Then I came back to Ireland just before the pandemic, and then I got a job in Europe as a translator, and that's what I'm doing now.
But tell me, I mean, that's extraordinary in terms of the self-motivation that you obviously had to go and learn the language, in circumstances where what you were studying primarily was not focused on the language. It was not your primary degree. I mean, what was driving you there? I mean, was it curiosity, interest? What was what kind of what bug bit you on to make you do that?
Well, I just found Irish fascinating. I remember taking the bus from Mooncoin to Limerick and looking out the window at all the place names and making sense of them in the Irish instead of in the English, and learning the tSionnaigh, the genitive case, just by looking at place names, because most place names are good examples of the tSionnaigh. And so I just found it fascinating. Grammatically, I found it fascinating, and also etymologically, and also the connection the language has to the people of Ireland. And I suppose I'm from a fairly Republican background as well, so the fact that the initial sort of fascination on a purely linguistic grounds lended itself well to, into a sort of Republican politics as well. Um, so, but I'd say when I stress though, it's just the fascination with the very interesting language that Irish is as well. That was the most important thing, I think.
Mm-hmm. 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 And then, am I correct in saying you did spend some time living in West Kerry as well, in Cork in the Gaeltacht there?
So I mentioned that I left out a lot of things because when I was giving you a resume of my education, that was like 12 years. So when I came back from teaching Irish in Montreal in Canada as part of the Ireland Canada University Foundation scheme, well, I was going to do a PhD in Montreal, and then I got a doctoral award from Mary I to do a PhD there. And the thesis that I chose to do as part of my PhD program was editing the repertoire of a storyteller called Seán Mac from Gaeilgeoir in West Kerry. So since I got the doctoral award, I didn't have to teach. A lot of PhD students would have to teach to be able to afford the years of college and all that. But I was lucky; I had an income, and I just went down to West Kerry because I was working on a West Kerry storyteller, and I didn't have to teach classes in Limerick. And I got myself a caravan, and I lived in the caravan for about 3 years. Most of 3 years it took me to start and finish my PhD. And those are amazing years. Maybe still the best years of my life so far. The years I'm living right now are completely different and interesting and enjoyable. It's only with hindsight you can really make categorize the years of our lives, which ones are the best ones. But when I look back on the years in West Kerry, they're just amazing. In so many ways, the people that I knew and also the sights, the landscape, the blue sky, especially in November. I'm going to be in West Kerry next month, and November is an amazing month if the weather is not really bad. If there's any sun at all in West Kerry in November, the light is just unbelievable. So, but yeah, I met amazing people, and they're very, very friendly to me. Corrected my Irish in very subtle and sometimes in very witty ways, and accepted me as one of them, really, just by virtue of my interest in the language and also in West Kerry Irish in particular.
Up to that point, had you been learning Irish in the Caidan, or were you learning Munster Irish up to that stage?
Very soon I started with the Munster Irish because I became curious about Kilkenny Irish, the Irish of my native county first, and then realised that Kilkenny play in the Leinster Championship, but the historical Irish spoken there is a variant of Munster Irish. And I also met people from Ring in County Waterford, that Gaeltacht, when I was in college, and I also found it kind of mind blowing that like a 40-minute drive from my house, there were native speakers of Irish, and so whenever I talk to those people from the Waterford Gaeltacht, I'd be telling myself that it's an accident of history it's a treachery of history that I'm not also a young Irish person speaking in this way, speaking this language, and that also, unfortunately, that Kilkenny Irish died out and is gone. It's not accessible to me, but the closest things to it are Waterford Irish and Kerry Irish. So for those reasons, I ended up in Kerry, though. I actually haven't spent that much time in Waterford, even though it's in the Waterford Gaeltacht, I mean. Even though it's very close to me, I actually haven't spent anywhere near as much time as I would have liked to. I ended up spending so much time in Kerry. As I said, I lived there for almost 3 years, but spent summers there too, weekends, for years and years and years. And I'd say that was after first year in college that I decided to concentrate on Munster Irish. Also living in Limerick, of course, going to college in Limerick. And
did you experience much Irish locally there?
I mean, outside the college community, when I was researching my master's thesis, which was about Timothy O'Neill Lane, the lexicographer from Temple Glanton, West Limerick. When I was researching his life, I went down to the area he was from, where he was born, and some of the people still living there were able to speak Irish, and greeted me in Irish down there, and made me tea and sandwiches in the kitchen, speaking Irish to me. And so yeah, I met people from Limerick who also knew Irish just from school, and were very happy to speak it to a young man curious about an element of their local heritage.
Wonderful. And tell me, Sean, if we kind of bring it forward, then now you're working as a translator. I mean, you've gone through a number of iterations in terms of, because of course you then subsequently achieved your PhD in that, and then subsequently lectured in Irish internationally, and now you're working professionally using the language. I mean, was that something you ever actually, by the way, is that something you kind of you had in mind, or you envisaged when you were starting off learning it? Was it something that you had an ambition to do that, or how did that kind of unfold?
Well, I remember having this idea when I was starting college, and when I was choosing to study English and history. I had this idea that I didn't want to have anything to do with Irish professionally, because I wanted to be it to be a language on a par with Polish or Japanese or any other language, which is a language spoken by people not for professional gain. And I felt like if I were to work with Irish, and this is my thinking when I was about 18. If I were to study Irish in college, then I'd be getting a job somehow in Irish, and if I did that, I'd just be a professional Gaeilgeoir, which the poet Michael. I remember reading a poem by Michael Hartnett, who I came across in my English degree, and he didn't speak very kindly about what he called the professional Gaeilgeoir, and that really struck me. So I was kind of stubborn for a while, but eventually I started to get opportunities. Before I even had my master's, people were asking me to give them grinds, and then I started translating scripts for TG Carr, and I couldn't turn it down because I had no money. I was completely broke. When I was in college, it was easier. I think it was easier back then not to be in college than it is now. It's actually getting a lot more difficult. I know that because I have a sister who was 12 years younger than me, and but I was still struggling then trying to get through college, and I used to busk as well with the double bass just to be able to pay for rent and pay for food. And when some of these Irish language opportunities start coming, I couldn't turn them down, and I haven't turned them down since. Not many of them anyway, because I have made my career through Irish, and I'm very lucky. I don't know what I'd be doing if in a parallel universe where Ireland was still Irish speaking. If Ireland was still majoritarily Irish speaking, I don't know what I'd be doing right now. I couldn't imagine what I'd be doing. Maybe I could look at my brothers and have an idea, because my brothers don't speak Irish actually. Maybe I'd just be in a similar situation to them work wise. But one other point about the Irish language, because I've learned other languages during my life, but the only reason I really learned them or had the interest in learning them was because of my curiosity in Irish, my own language. So I think, again, in a parallel universe where Irish is the majority language of Ireland, if I were still Shane Fox or Sean Mac, I probably would never have learned French, which I speak every day living here in Brussels. And because I speak French, I spoke French every day living in Montreal too, and met some of the very best friends I have in life. So I would never would have known them if it were not for being able to speak Irish.
Well, that's really interesting, though. I think the way that you've approached that, and I'd love just to just tease that out a little bit, if you don't mind, is to what extent was your love of Irish or your attraction towards Irish or so on, let's say motivated or driven by a love of language, as opposed to, let's say, Irish and its role in your identity as an Irish person, or how you saw yourself as an Irish person or see yourself and so on?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche, but like I love Ireland. So I love every aspect of Ireland. I love buying diesel in Ireland, and being able to speak Irish or not being able to speak Irish is just another aspect of being Irish and taking part in Irish life. So it's very difficult for me to take things apart and say why. Why? Because I spent a lot of time learning Irish, studying it and practicing pronunciation and practicing my comprehension, listening to the radio, and probably a bit obsessive as well, to be honest. And I don't know why, really, to be honest. I don't have an answer for that, really. I mean, the first thing I said about just loving Ireland is probably part of it. And as I said, for me, just to walk down the street in Cork, for example, go to the English market, I absolutely love that. And maybe you could say that the Irish language appeals to me because it's a very well-established and interesting expression of Irishness. Maybe and unfortunately it's still rare enough to speak Irish, so maybe just the rarity of that aspect of Irishness maybe appeals to me.
And could we look then at something that I find fascinating, and it's, having spoken to a number of people now, and we speak about the language and the state of the language and so on, and one of the things I've been constantly hearing is that people say, oh, well, look, I don't have any fear of the language because it's almost like there are two parallel language communities now. There's the Gaeltacht and there's the Gaeltacht, and there is Irish speaking outside of the Gaeltacht. So you have the Gaeltacht in Ireland, and then you have also, I suppose, the thing that the phenomenon that you're a part of, which is the, let's say, Irish language officialdom across the EU and so on. I mean, because there has been an explosion there, I think, in recent times since Irish was made or the derogation for Irish as an official language of the EU was ceased earlier this year, and I believe that the number of translators in Brussels has increased significantly since then. So could you talk to me about what that community is like? You're living in Brussels now. I believe there's quite a big Irish language speaking community there now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I live just outside Brussels. Okay. I live in Flanders, and I live in probably the only French speaking commune. We say commune here. Commune in Belgium doesn't mean the same thing as what commune brings to mind, maybe, to an English speaker. Municipality, maybe. So I live in probably the only French-speaking commune of Flanders, which is the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. And my office is in Brussels, a French-speaking city, and I go there nearly every day, despite presence in the office being, with the pandemic and everything, it's not the same as it used to be. But I go to the office almost every day. And I have about 60 colleagues, and we're all translating from English to Irish, French to Irish, Italian to Irish, German to Irish. I think some people translate from Spanish to Irish. And we do a good long work week. We work about 40 hours a week, and we socialize together as well. Have lunch together, dinner together, go to the bar together, go for walks together. And always speaking Irish. And I have to say, I don't really have any Belgian friends. I only talk to Irish people most of the time in Irish. I play hurling over here on Crea Brua, which is Brussels, which is a GA club here in Brussels. And if it weren't for playing in Crea Brua, I'd probably only be speaking Irish all the time socially. I do have to speak French to shopkeepers, or I'm renovating a house here, so I'm talking to builders all the time in French. But French for me is very much like a language I use with strangers. It's unfortunate. I'd like to know some Belgian people. I've nothing against knowing Belgian people, but I'm just so busy with my work as a translator, and also having fun with the amazing Irish community here in Brussels. And it's very interesting. And some people, you often hear people say, even Irish speakers based in Ireland or anywhere else in the world, you often hear them say it's a waste to have so many people come here to translate, and that maybe the people that come here to Brussels to translate or do other jobs in Europe, that it's a loss to Ireland. So I don't agree with that. I think it brings a lot to the status of the language, the fact that we're here doing the work we're doing and also building the community that we're building. Both those things bring a lot in terms of the status of the Irish language.
Sure, but more particularly, I'm just interested in the phenomenon that is that community that you're a part of now. They're in Brussels. I mean, that's so you work and socialize and do everything that you do. Is the Irish language the predominant language that you use day in, day out?
Definitely. Yeah. As I said, I only speak French to builders, police.
Transactionally.
Transactionally, I suppose is a good way to say it.
Yeah. That's let's say an instance of Irish, blossoming or a whole new community sort of springing up there, arising out of that new. And again, it's almost despite the Irish government, because I think they would have maintained the derogation for as long as possible, and I think it was the EU that actually said, "Hold on, no, you're going to have to use this official language now and actually start translating things."
Well, and Irish people within the EU as well.
We're advocating for it.
Yeah, and some of my current colleagues worked very hard to remove the derogation for the Irish language, even though it inevitably meant that we were going to be under pressure once absolutely everything had to be translated. It meant an increase in the workload for all of us. But we've been recruiting steadily ever since. We were recruiting in anticipation of the new workload, and we're still recruiting. And recently, a whole load of people became permanent. So it's going very well. It's going very well, and we're forgetting the English word for in chortha. In chortha le gach rein ele gach tanga ele. We're comparable to. We're on a par with any other official language in Europe.
And how do you find? Do you have difficulty in recruiting sufficiently qualified translators?
I'm not involved in recruitment, obviously, but
sure.
I think it's my perception that these jobs are highly sought after and kind of trendy, because you get to come over to Europe and live in Brussels and experience a different life, an interesting life. You have Amsterdam up the road, Paris down the road, and other very interesting cities if you just drive a little bit further again. So yeah, I think a lot of people are very interested in having these jobs, and then you have all these programs in translation and interpretation all over Ireland, and there's only more and more of them. So.
And what is that just interesting? Because now that you mentioned that, because it does sound very appealing, actually. But I imagine it would be something that is appealing to a person at a certain stage in their life. I mean, do you find people who are maybe settling down and having kids, are they part of that community?
There are people raising kids here in Brussels through Irish.
Wow.
Sure. There are children here whose first language is Irish who were born here.
Wow.
But it ranges. There, as I said, I have about 60 colleagues. We have people in their early 20s, people in the late 60s. I'm 34. And you have different kinds of people. You have family people who you might not see very much outside the office, and then you have people who have less responsibilities, and they're out and about a bit more, and we get on very well. I think we have a very special relationship with each other. I don't think I can't, no other language comes to mind, at least, where the translators have this sort of commitment to the Irish language. Because for us, we understand how important it is for the Irish language to have this status, and we want to do something for the language. I'm not sure that's the case for other language departments.
And it's interesting because I actually I recall discussing this with you previously, actually, in terms of your experience, that, and correct me if I'm wrong now, but my impression was that in a lot of cases, people from other kind of major languages, let's say across Europe, might be inclined or are interested in speaking English as the common language, because it's, you know, because it's such a common international language, but that the Irish community is quite different in that while all of you speaking English fluently, obviously, you choose quite determinedly to do everything to Irish.
Yeah, I think that proves my point.
Yeah.
It's important as well, though, to not isolate ourselves, and we don't isolate ourselves either. During the pandemic, we were very isolated, I suppose, because there was nothing to do, and I think the things I'm saying about the Irish language community in Brussels, they're very much influenced by the pandemic. Because when I first got here, I didn't get a chance to meet anybody from other departments because we weren't allowed to go anywhere near the office. So my entire life for the first year and a half of my career in the EU was online and in my apartment. So that definitely, and since a lot of us sort of started, because the department, I think, has almost tripled since before the pandemic. So I think that also helped us to bond as a department as well. That a lot of us started during the pandemic. I think that could have something to do with it as well. And that wouldn't have been the case for other departments because they would have been more established earlier than us.
And so that's, I think that's just an extraordinary little microcosm of the language there in Brussels. And I mean, and we also have extraordinary other instances of that outside the Gaeltacht in Ireland. And as I say, when I've spoken to people, they've often said to me, "Oh, well, look, I've no fear of the language. The language is going to be fine, or it'll you know, develop and evolve and whatever." But the thing that they're most fearful of is the Gaeltacht, and they see that the Gaeltacht, sustaining the language in the Gaeltacht is a crisis. I think I've heard it most described as. You're somebody who spent, you say, 3 years, 3 great years. I get the impression from speaking to you. What's your sense in relation to that? And you're somebody who goes back to regular. You know, as somebody who's part of a vibrant community and probably in a growth sector, if you want to think of it in terms of the Irish language, and one with tremendous potential, what's your take on the Irish language in the Gaeltacht and how you see that unfolding?
On the Gaeltacht, having lived there, yeah, there was a lot of debate around the Gaeltacht online over the past few years, and it's very controversial, and it's kind of scary to talk about. So there's a situation now where second language speakers of Irish outnumber residents of the Gaeltacht, and that's given rise to some interesting debates as to maybe ownership of the language.
Mm-hmm. I'm
not sure we should waste any time in talking about who owns the language, but in some sense, I think that there needs to be some deference to the people of the Gaeltacht. And to be honest, I don't see much of a difference between anybody in the world learning French versus might be a bit of a harsh word to use, but when I see Irish people learning Irish, I see their relationship to Gaeltacht speakers of Irish as similar to anybody who decides to learn French and going to Paris. In my mind, that it's an easy comparison to make. But I think that's problematic for a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, we're all Irish and we all have equal ownership of the language. I'd prefer to bypass the concept of ownership altogether. So when I say there should be some deference towards people of Gaeltacht, I'm not necessarily saying they own the language and get to decide who speaks it or anything. But I think the fact that they've kept the show going, maybe not necessarily for us, but they've kept the show going in a way that people from areas of Ireland where sadly Irish died out can go to the Gaeltacht and learn from native speakers, proficient speakers. Again, I don't want to talk about debt, but there are indebtedness, but there's definitely a gratitude that needs to be there and a recognition that needs to be there. And yeah, even when I'm saying that much, I'm wondering if it's controversial and people are being unhappy with it.
Well, I suppose they are the sources that remain to us of the language as it has come down, and if they're gone, they're gone, as the ad says. I mean, apart from anything else, I think that seems to me to be the essence of it. Before we wrap up, I would love to just, I mean, you're somebody, just your story is extraordinary in terms of your own personal journey in relation to the language. I know that word is overused now, but you know, like the fact that you chose to commit and go so deeply into this language and learn it so proficiently, and you've achieved mastery in the language now, you know, off your own bat or based on, you know, on your certainly self-motivated, shall we say, and over a extraordinary long period of time, and having spent periods of time living in the Gaeltacht and all of those things, which are huge commitments that few people are willing to make to learn something as deeply as you have. What would you say to somebody who is struggling to learn the language now? And you know, is it worth it? Can they do it? Can they expect to achieve, you know, a level of proficiency where they can enjoy and appreciate the language? What would you say to somebody like that?
Well, first of all, I'd say fair play to them for struggling to learn Irish, because it's quite a struggle. At the moment, I'm struggling with Turkish, but it's not bothering me. I wish I could speak it better. I wish I had more time to work at it. I wish I were 10 years younger too. I think I noticed a difference. I think I noticed the difference between learning languages at 24 and learning languages at 34. So in the present moment, I know what it feels like to struggle with learning language. And I can also remember struggling with learning Irish when I was about 18 as well. And definitely for years believing that I would never speak Irish. And definitely for years periodically telling myself I was giving up. And I just kept at it. So it's, I suppose, like anything in life, if it's something you really want, you have to keep at it. And also remember that whatever you're doing in life, I think the most important part of that thing is the process through which you achieve it or don't achieve it. Don't delay gratification, just stay in the present. And just enjoy the challenge of, I don't know, focusing on a particular element of grammar and look at that as a game of chess, enjoy it, and not get disheartened when you fail at it. Something like that. That's what I would want to say to a person that's struggling with the language. And also come back to the first thing I said, which is fair play to them for taking the time to struggle with something like learning the Irish language. And obviously there are loads of resources out there. You know, if the person drives, leave Radio Gaeltacht on in their car all the time. I used to do that as well. The first car I ever got, I just put on Radio Gaeltacht didn't have a cassette player or a CD player, just had a radio that kind of worked, and I never changed it from Radio na Gaeltacht until I got it scrapped. And then when I was 18, 19, there was no social media, and that is a massive help to people learning the language. And there's a really strong Irish language community online, as far as I can see, extremely welcoming and almost desperate in how welcoming it is. You know, if anybody goes online and says, "Oh, I want to learn Irish," and then you get loads of people retweeting you, giving you hearts, words of encouragement, and that community should be used as well, I think.
Well, gandát a cara. It's few gemore gandát. A Seán a cara gur míle maithagat bhfuil mé ansult as an scéal a rainn tú linn berbua agus Spannach a cara.
Gur míle maithagat Seaghan.
Thanks for listening. Gur míle maithagat as a bheith éisteacht. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests and to receive exclusive content. Slán Tamil.